So good afternoon and good morning, everyone. And thank you all so much for coming out to our March 2024 Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, or SoTL Speaker Series session, Decolonizing in Action, using the 3P's framework to enhance Indigenous inclusion. My name is Dr. Tommy Mayberry, and I'm the director of our inaugural Center for Teaching Excellence and Innovation here at YU and TFS. And it is my incredible honor and privilege to be in relationship with Dr. Johanne McCarthy, whom we'll be meeting and learning with and from today as our invited scholarly teacher. As I open in a good way with the land story and territorial acknowledgement to bring us together in one virtual shared space today, so we can reflect deeply and meaningfully on the lands across which we operate here at TFS, to ensure we all engage with, be with, and access the land story and acknowledgement, I'd like to do an access check. The image on this slide is a single-cell graphic cartoon cell that depicts an adult person shoveling off of the stairs leading up to what appears to be a school. A young student in a wheelchair asks the adult, "Could you please shovel the ramp?" After the adult replies with, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you." The student in the wheelchair responds, "But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." At CTEI, we understand access to be a shared responsibility between everyone in the spaces we host and facilitate. We strive to create accessible spaces that reduce the need for you to disclose a disability or impairment for the purpose of engaging fully as your whole self. In doing this together, we commit to welcoming disability and the powerful changes it brings into our spaces. You will have noticed, normally at this point I would ask, is there anything about the space of the Zoom call we should address before we start? But you'll already have noticed that the captions are not working and you are not able to turn those on yourself. I have a ticket in with IST who have reached out to the Zoom folks for that. Zoom itself faced a bit of a glitch last week that has affected some of the functionality and some of those pieces. So I do sincerely apologize that that very basic access piece of having captions on and transcripts being provided are not here. We are recording this session, and I will have a thick description transcription available once we get that available. Once we get that up after as well for that. Other than the captions, which I realize is not an accessible way to do an access check, but other than the captions, are there any other access needs that might affect your participation in the workshop that we could address? If at any point you find that access could be improved for your engagement and learning together with us today, please private message either myself, Irong Wang, or Natasha Hannon in the Zoom chat, and we'll bring it to attention for actioning together. When I first joined Yorkville University and Toronto Film School, but actually, no, that's a lie, sorry, when I was interviewing for the position I'm now in at YU and TFS, and I was researching and learning about YU and TFS to prepare for that interview, I was met with a challenging and important realization that we've built and are continuing to build our organization, not just on one area of land, but across multiple lands, which isn't always the case for post-secondary educational institutions. We're coast to coast, as we very proudly say and know to be true of ourselves and our higher ed work here. Because at Yorkville University and Toronto Film School, we work across multiple physical and online campuses that are built on and draw resources from multiple treaty lands in this nation now called Canada, as well as from numerous traditional territories of diverse Indigenous peoples and nations who are still here today. Our campus in what is now known as New Brunswick sits on land under the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1760 and 1761 on the land of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Mi'kmaq, and the Wolastoqiyik First Nation. The black and white picture on this slide on the top right is a scan of the archived document with the signature of Claude Atouche, chief of the Shediac Mi'kmaq tribe, on the Peace and Friendship Treaty, bringing that history of New Brunswick right to us in and for our work. The picture on the top left is a scan of the archive document with the signatures at the bottom of the parties who ratified Treaty 13. Our campuses in what is now known as downtown Toronto, as well as the Steeles neighborhood in Toronto, sit on treaty land of the Toronto Purchase of 1787, which is also known as Treaty 13. This is the land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This is part of our living history on these lands in southwestern Ontario today. And our campus in what is now known as British Columbia is not treaty land, but sits on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people of the Wantlen, Musqueam, and Kakite First Nations. Being unceded and not having ever entered into signing treaty agreements with the government of Canada, there is no archival photo of any ratified signatures. So this black and white archival photo is of the Wantlyn Winter Encampment that became the site of New Westminster. Here in this photo, that site is viewed from the Surrey shore of the Fraser River. And of course, our BC campus is specifically built in New Westminster, right on top of this land shown here. Engaging in scholarly teaching work coast to coast across these lands today colonially known as Canada requires us all, individually and collectively, to commit to not just learning and to continuing to learn about the lands on and across which we operate, but also to committing to unlearning and relearning and continuing to unlearn and relearn, always in truth and always toward reconciliation. As I said, it is my incredible honor and privilege to be in relationship with Dr. Johanne McCarthy, and I'm very humbled to be opening this session in a good way. Before we pass it over to Dr. Jo for her session on decolonization in action, I'd like to please bring on our YU President and Vice Chancellor, Dr. Julia Christensen-Hughes, to say a few words of welcome and gratitude to Jo as well. So Dr. Julia, over to you, please.
Thank you, Tommy, for that wonderful introduction. I am here today to learn, and you've already helped start my learning. Those were remarkable photos, and I'm just so impressed with how you've communicated that history to all of us. And I come to this session myself as a scholar who has an interest, a deep interest in this work, even though I consider myself a real novice. So Jo, I can hardly wait for your session, and I know I'm just going to learn so much from you today. But some of you will be aware that my own research spans a number of different areas, but I've got this abiding interest in the concept of academic integrity, questioning what that is, why it's so essential to our institutions, and how we can best support it. And of course, when people hear the concept academic integrity, often they think fairly narrowly about student cheating and what we can do about that. In a recent book that I co-edited, I tried to expand that notion to look at the integrity of faculty as well as the integrity of leaders of higher education institutions. But in one chapter in particular, I went up a very, very steep learning curve because I'm not a historian. But I started questioning the assumption, it seems to me, that when students cheat or when faculty engage in misconduct, that somehow that is a violation of norms that we can count on, that the academy is inherently ethical. And so that when misconduct happens, it's something other than that. But I started to question, is that really true? So I ended up writing a chapter, and I think Tommy's making that available to folks if you're interested. It's called Academic Integrity Across Time and Place, Higher Education's Questionable Moral Calling. And what I did is I traced the evolution of Western higher education back to Europe, to Italy and France, into England. And then as higher education came across the ocean, landed first in Harvard, proliferated across North America, I just realized that from the very founding of higher education, that you should absolutely question its morality, the truths that were allowed to be disseminated, what happened to people if they disseminated other truths. People used to be burned at the stake on campuses in England if they dared to speak against the church of the time, for example. Harvard was absolutely launched as a mechanism for colonizing North America. That was its inherent purpose. So when you realize the role of church and state creating higher education institutions for their own ends, and of course in Canada, through the horrors of the so-called residential school system, how these mechanisms really prevented the participation of First Nations people in the education system. And of course, across all of North America, as well as Europe, you had to graduate from a university if you were going to go on to a significant position of trust and power and influence in society. And so in this chapter, I lay out this and more. But I just have to, I guess, kind of confess that I was so embarrassed as somebody who's been working in the academy when I wrote this chapter for almost 35 years. And I did not know this history. I didn't know of all of the sort of pressures that and sort of systemic barriers to participation, the limits that were placed on the truths that could be told, who had access. Tommy, I want to go, I love that, that your depiction of access and those sort of unintended assumptions that we make that block participation. But beyond that, there was the most horrific complicity of higher education and some of the experiments that took place on the students in the residential schools in Canada that in fact helped inform Canada's National Food Guide, where students were deprived of nutrition and then studied. So higher education in Canada, I'll just cut to the chase, has this highly questionable past in terms of our morality, in terms of our understandings of truth. And this is why I am personally so committed to supporting us on this journey of trying to understand what it means for each one of us in our various roles to decolonize our curriculum, to enhance our accessibility, and truly provide the support our students need on their transformational learning journeys. So with that, enough from me, but just to say, Joe, I couldn't be more delighted and honored that you've agreed to spend the time with us here today and to help all of us learn about each of our roles in working towards reconciliation. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, I am like really, really touched. And I'm so grateful to Natasha for bringing me into this because just in this introduction, like this is what reconciliation is about. And this is going to be, I know, a profoundly healing like gathering and meeting today. So my name is Dr. Johanne McCarthy. I'm Onondaga Nation, Beaver Clan. I'm from 6 Nations of the Grand River Territory. And I am a mother of 2 children and 2 dogs. And I just really, really enjoy sharing everything that I've learned, everything that my mom has taught me through, and all of what our ancestors have shared with us over the years, and all of these things that I kind of realized as I was going through my own adventure as a student in Western education, with a strong cultural background from my family and connection to 6 Nations. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here today. So we are going to experiment with a platform, a software platform that I discovered when we switched to rapid online learning. So we had 7 days to transition everything that we did online. And the challenge for people on 6 Nations is that we didn't have infrastructure for Wi-Fi at the time. So it was really challenging. And I was like a big advocate at Mohawk College for incorporating Indigenous pedagogy, which you're going to learn a little bit about in this presentation. And it's really about active learning and engaging people in the conversation so that we could create these relationships so that you're just not getting to know about me. I'm also getting to know about you so that I can tailor some of the things that we talk about and focus on throughout the presentation. So I will get Tommy to, yep, the link's up there in the chat there. And if you click on that link, it's going to take you to this presentation here. And you'll have, so you can, if you can't get on the presentation for some reason, you can watch it on the screen that that's being shared as well. So we have multiple ways, but if you go on the link, then you can actually participate with this talk. So I have over 20 years experience in motivating behavior change using cognitive behavioral psychology. And I started out as an Indigenous counselor. Well, I started out as a naturopath, then an Indigenous counselor within the academic institution. And then I have just progressed from job to job to job, from faculty to curriculum development to program development to the Center for Teaching and Learning. And then finally, I came back home to Nations Polytechnic as their Dean of Academic Programs. So I am really grateful to be invited here today to share and connect. And I really want to say, wow, Tommy, that was like a really great land acknowledgement. It was just done wonderfully, and I'm grateful for everybody that's here today. So let's begin with the Nearpod, and I'm just going to test it out and ask you guys a poll. We're going to start with a poll because I'm curious, how many of you have used Nearpod before, either as a student or as a teacher? And I see we already do have 29 participants on the platform. Awesome. So we've got everybody on the platform here. And let's see. Share the results here. Okay, we see that 75 people have not used Nearpod before and 6.2 people, I don't know who the 0.2 is, have yes used it before. So that's great. So we're learning something new here. And I like this platform because even though you're out there in internet land, there's this opportunity for us to communicate, to connect, and to interact with each other. And I've built a lot of interactivity and opportunity to communicate in this presentation because I really feel like communication is so important. It's how we actually build relationships. And so I'm grateful that you're all here today and for your time and that you're getting to know me a little as an Angwahoe woman. And hopefully through this tech tool, I also get to know you. So this is your next question. And it's a little harder. I want to know, have you consciously indigenized or decolonized your curriculum or workplace? I'll just give people a few minutes to answer. And we can see we've got some yeses, some I'm not sures, and some no's. So that's great. I'm like really, and I think that's that introduction from Julia, that was like fabulous because I can see that there is a focus in this place to decolonize and to indigenize, to add Indigenous content, to add extra perspective into the curriculum. So, you know, I'm really, really happy about that. When I first started teaching, it wasn't even something that people were thinking of doing to bring Indigenous students in. It was really focused on increasing numbers. And so it's nice to see that that's changed. And it's not just about increasing the numbers of Indigenous students. It's about actually incorporating some of the curriculum as well and ways of doing things and sharing different ways of knowing. Okay, and this is my last question to get to know you all better. I'm wondering about your motivation for being here. So please select the best answer. I'm here because my boss made me. I'm here because I want to learn about Indigenous perspectives. I'm here because I want to learn about reconciliation. I'm here because I want to learn about decolonization, or all of the above. Okay, Got lots of people answering this one. That's great. 0 are only here because they're bossy. That's really good. So there's lots of people that want to learn about Indigenous perspectives and wanting to learn about decolonization. Some who are not sure why they're here and maybe didn't submit an answer, but that's okay too. I really like people to have open minds. I really like to welcome people in and to start in a good way. So we have certain things that we like to do to start in a good way. So on Turtle Island, we do things that help us to connect to each other. So asking questions and trying to to know each other, and also other customs that connect us in our relationship to each other. So like the land acknowledgement, that's something that helps to connect us. And I'm really appreciative to hear that. It's a shared custom of this land. And actually lots of Indigenous people have this custom. So it's sort of like if a visitor comes to your house, I would want to follow the house rules, and I would be grateful for being welcomed into that house. So I would notice things like if you take your shoes off in the house, and then I would respectfully follow that practice. And then if I was staying for a long period of time, I would maybe ask questions about the proper way to behave, and maybe things like when you like to turn in for the night, or if I should be the one locking up the doors, or if even what your morning routine is, so that I can respect that and, not get in your way or not make you upset or anything. And I could ask how I could contribute to the house, like maybe with the upkeep or helping with the dishes or laundry or feeding pets or kids. And I would say to you out of respect that I'm grateful for being here, and I would act with that gratitude as well. And so another thing that we do is called the Ganohanyo. And so like the land acknowledgement that visitors would do if they came to our house or our territory, the Ganohanyo is for us to do, and we ground ourselves in our place and our belonging within the delicate web of life. So the Ganohanyo is known as the Thanksgiving address, or the words we say before all else. This is a greeting to our natural world, and it helps to position us in the web of life together with all of our relations. So we say this in gratitude to join us all together and to acknowledge with heartfelt mindfulness the interdependence of all things responsible for our existence and well-being at this very moment in time. So we thank and we acknowledge the importance of all the life-sustaining forces of both the natural and the spiritual environments. And we say this at the beginning of every day and before every special meeting for ourselves and on behalf of all the people. So it's a way of joining us together in our thoughts and in our hearts, and a way to reflect on our special invitation into this web of interdependence together. And we understand that if any other creature or any being or element was removed from this ecosystem, that the entire web would collapse. But if humans were removed, the entire system would actually flourish. And we actually saw a little bit of this with those COVID lockdowns. Like, we saw the environment seem to flourish without that human activity. So to acknowledge this, we are grateful, and we remind ourselves to be very respectful of all that sustains our existence. And then you may have also heard of another custom that some of us do. It's called smudging. So this is to ground us with that good mind. So smudging is the act of burning sage and waving the smoke over our eyes so that we only see the good in others, our ears so that we hear the kindness of people's intentions, our mouths so that we speak words that build people up rather than tear them down, and then our minds so that we're thinking positively for our communities. And another thing that some of us do, and we've used within some of my classes and workshops, is placing a burden basket at the door. So these baskets, they were typically used by women to gather food, medicines, and even firewood. So no woman was ever asked to carry more than her burden. And, you know, like I know that sometimes this happens and sometimes you can really feel overwhelmed. And this state of overwhelm can impact our presence and our focus. So these baskets, they were hung at the door once the day was over and once the work was completed. And burden baskets are now hung symbolically, and anyone entering a space is asked to leave their burdens at the door so that they clear their minds and empty it of all the external worries and concerns, so that the time that we spend together is free from distractions, and it allows you to focus on the relationships and the learning that you have before you. Okay, so I want us all to just take a big breath in. And with the exhale, leave all of your burdens, all of your busyness, all of those emails in the burden basket, the virtual burden basket. And so that we can spend this time together, really getting to know each other and learning new things together. Okay, so does that sound good? Okay. Okay, so today on our learning journey together, every one of you may be in a different place, and I recognize that. We don't know sometimes what we don't know. So to me, I just think it's beautiful that we're all coming here from a different place. So I always refrain from writing learning objectives because I think that's too rigid. By the end of this, I'm hoping that you can jot down 3 to 5 things that you've learned, like you have realized, that are new to you, and you know, hopefully share it. So this is so that your learning will meet you where you're at, because we all should be allowed to grow on our own, in our own way and at our own pace and with our own perspectives and focus. And my big hope is that some of your experiences today will spark some of these emergent and unscripted dynamic learning, and more importantly, spark some curiosity to learn more. So I'm going to start by giving a quick context of relationships on Turtle Island. And keep in mind that the knowledge on Turtle Island is as diverse, just as what Tommy was saying in the land acknowledgement. It's just as diverse as the landscape, with over 617 different Indigenous nations. There's a lot of diversity, and we have varying historical and social contexts that have shaped our relationships. So there's a lot of difference, and you're just hearing my side of the story here. So sometimes this information, it can be so new to people, and it's challenging, because it's challenging, it feels a little bit uncomfortable. So I'm going to ask you to actually lean into that discomfort and reflect upon that, because this will help you to foster a deeper connection and understanding. And then we're going to dive in and explore how to engage inclusive practice and motivate inclusive behavioral change systematically and systemically across your organization. So we're going to look at a framework that I developed called the 3P's framework, and look at how it can be used and applied for individual and group purposes to foster reconciliation and Indigenous inclusion on our home territory. Okay, so before we begin, we're going to play a little quiz matching game, because I want to see what you know about some of the things that we've already talked about. And I'm going to see what you've been paying attention to. So this is a matching game. And I want you to try and match the custom, the item, the place, or the event. And some of them I've mentioned and some of them I haven't. And I want you to try to match them to the nation that it's known for. And so when you find a pair that you think matches, you click on them one after the other, and then I'll give you you've got about 1 minute to complete this. And you can keep trying as many times as you want. Oh, and it's like I can see on the back end here, I can see who's answering what. And I see there's like a lot of people who are doing really well. So that's pretty encouraging from other times that I've played this game with groups. It's pretty encouraging. Just about 20 seconds left. Got lots of people getting 10 out of 10 now. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, awesome. Time's up. Now I'm going to try and get your feedback. So if you click on this next link, I want to see what you learned from that activity. So Tommy, if you want to click on yours, click here to open the web page. So it's going to take you to an answer garden. And on the answer garden, oh, it's not projecting. Is that because it's a different screen?
I think so. I'm going to try to switch to the other screen so that we
Okay.
see that one
Yeah.
too.
So when you click on and you open that web page, it takes you to the answer garden and you can see said, what do you learn from the matching game? And you can type your answer in there, or you can click on one of the responses to make it grow bigger. If you agree with that response as well. And so this grows what people are aligning to. So there's multiple options that you can see how many people are thinking the same way as you, or you can see new ideas that you might not have considered about how, like how that game made you feel, right? If it's not possible, it's okay. Because I think people can see it on their end growing, right? So some of the things that are on that answer garden that you'll see is that you can see it on the screen that Tommy's projecting as well, is that people are recognizing that they need to learn more. They're recognizing that there is a lack of knowledge, that you know, they knew a lot of European stuff, right? Sometimes when I do this exercise, it's the first realization that people have had that, oh my gosh, my learning has really been Eurocentric. I know more about nations that are not original to North America than I do about, you know, the people on this land. So, you know, I just want you to think about that. And as you're learning this stuff, I want you to reflect upon that, what we know and where we're getting that knowledge from and what's being excluded, right? And what's being left out. So I want you to think the next question about how do we know the things that we know? So if you can answer that in that space there. So they're rolling in now. So we learn from others and we learn from our experiences. We learn from others again. We seek out new knowledge. And this one, I love this. We learn from relationships. Our culture teaches us what we know. What's taught to us in school, information is passed along from family and from social and from others. We see and hear them repeatedly and their importance. We learn from family, schools, experiences, connections with others. Self-directed learning, right? So there's a lot of ways that we learn things, but we learn things from our experience. So we know through learning, for Indigenous nations on Turtle Island, learning is more than just about learning. It's more than just about experience. It's actually about healing. It's a process. And on this short journey we have together, I'm hoping to prompt you to think and reflect upon how you know what you know and what learning actually means to you. So I'm not here to give all the answers. I'm here to spark your curiosity so that you can follow and value your authenticity. And then by doing that, hopefully value others, right? So this first diagram is of the Indigenous experiential learning cycle. The process goes that we experience something, and then we open up and we reflect upon it, especially stuff that makes us a little uncomfortable. So when we experience that discomfort's called cognitive dissonance. We have this hardwired tendency to be more comfortable with that which we already believe to be true. So when something makes us a bit uncomfortable, it can actually be a good signal that we're learning something new. And that's where we find new learning. So my job here is to help you experience something new and then help you open up your awareness and reflection. And your job will be to make meaning from your new learning and then take action and move forward for richer and more diverse learning. The next visual shows how we heal in relationships with ourselves and within that web of life together. It's also a learning process, and it starts by prompting you to explore who you are. So this is our center. This is where we start. And it's that development of that self-actualization or your individual strengths and gifts and knowing what those are. And knowing what's yours and not the ones that society expects of you. So it's not uniting merely by fitting someone else's standards, but rather a value for difference or for being yourself. And then we go to the next level, which is a little bit more expansive, and we think about where you've come from. So Haudenosaunee culture teaches an understanding that our lives do not happen in a vacuum. We come from a context of experiences, like our culture through instilling values and beliefs becomes our filter for helping us to perceive the world. And then how we perceive the world then influences our behaviors and our ways of interacting with ourselves and everyone and everything around us. So then when we get to meaning making, that's kind of like how we construct why we're here. So transforming our experiences into purpose. And I think people, in my experience as a naturopathic doctor, it's really, I've really realized that people actually achieve health by meaning making. So by feeling a sense of purpose for the experience that they've had, whether it's good or bad, and then doing their part in that intricate web of life and contributing to something to make meaning and value out of that experience. So to help us with reconciliation, we can exercise the skill of meaning making and transform our experiences into a life purpose to help other people acting in that web of life, or like what Julie has already done, writing a chapter, sharing what she's learned and advocating for more learning for other people. So that's amazing. So a lot of that first step in learning, that experience part and perceptions of what is considered normal, it comes from our worldview or our way of looking at how we fit in relation to others and other things. So your worldview is essentially your narrative of normal. A worldview is a combination of axiology or ideas about worth and value, epistemology or ideas about knowledge, and what it is and how it's transmitted, and ontology or ideas about reality and existence. So axiology, epistemology, and ontology, they all come from our core values that are taught through our culture, and they're reinforced through our experiences. So just like on the last slide with these experiences, we reflect on them and then we make meaning from them and then we act on them. These core values, they become our beliefs and our perceptions, and then they become our attitudes and our behaviors, and then our standards of being with each other and within the world. So my mom always used to say to me that believing is seeing instead of seeing is believing. And she said this because of all the racism that she endured and all the racism she had to navigate in her lifetime, in her experience. And in a way, she's right, because our beliefs really do impact what we perceive and how we think and how we behave. So it is really important to realize and reflect upon how culture and worldview needs to be checked, because it can trick us if we aren't aware. And even if we are aware, it can still trick us. So I want to show you what I mean about being tricked. This illusion, you can press play, but when you press play, I want you to click on the mute volume button. Good. You can press play and we'll watch this. So this illusion, it's called Ames's window, and it was created by Adelbert Ames Jr. way back in the late 1940s. And I want you to watch this moving frame and see what it looks like to you. What does it look like it's doing? Is it spinning in a circle? Or is it moving back and forth? So when I watch this, to me, it looks like a cardboard replica of a window that's swaying back and forth. But you're going to see what it's actually doing. So the tube or the pen or the pointer stick just seems to be jumping through the window. That's so weird. So how's that happening? So what's actually happening is this is a trapezoid, not a rectangular window. And the trapezoid is rotating in a full circular motion. It's not swaying back and forth as I was perceiving. I don't know what you guys were perceiving. So the perceived oscillation is actually an error, and our brains are biased and they incline us to think that this is actually a window shape. And we do this because we've seen a lot of windows in our lifetime. Our past experience with windows leads us to assume that this is an oscillating rectangular window, and our brain has made an error based on what it assumes. And we make these errors because we formed a cognitive shortcut or narrow pathway that helps us to efficiently navigate a very complicated world. Shortcuts help us to make sense of the millions and millions of bits of information that are coming in from our environment all at once. And we all do this. We just really need to become more aware of it, because sometimes these shortcuts that we make in life are incorrect. And they're so powerful that even when we know they're incorrect, we still perceive the improper information. So even though I know that this is an illusion, and I've watched it like a lot of times, even though when I know I should be seeing this trapezoid that's just, rotating completely, my brain overrides that and biases my interpretation to match my hardwired assumption and experience with Windows. So it's really interesting to know that in 1972, researchers named Leibowitz and Pick did a study of this illusion comparing reported perceptions between US college students and rural Ugandans. And the rural Ugandans who had no previous experience with window frames, they did not fall for the illusion the same way that the US college students did, because they had not constructed a shortcut to favor the perception of windows. So what is the point of all of this? Well, the point of all of this is to show you that experience leads to learning, and lack of experience can also lead to not learning. So with repeated exposure to one thing and not something else, it's really easy for the brain to create shortcuts or biases. And a bias is defined as a systematic tendency that influences our judgment and decision-making or actions unconsciously. And it leads to unfair or inaccurate outcomes. It's part of natural cognition. And remember, we all make shortcuts to help us make sense of a very, very complicated world. And most importantly, we can learn biases through socialization and cultural conditioning. So to heal our relationships, we need to recognize that we have very different worldviews, setting us up for sometimes conflicting perspectives. And without learning about the other, we can anchor in some unconscious and sometimes very harmful shortcuts or biases. In systems of education, we see the domination of the Euro-American perspectives, but not just about what they teach us. So like in the matching game, we realize that the what we learned is different. We see differences in the how too. So we have, like what Julia was mentioning, we have tests that grade us in comparison with each other, rating one person higher with higher average, and sort of like this assumption that they're better than the other. And we have students that are punished for cheating or helping their peers, which is, you know, how Indigenous people would see that they were helping their peers. And so then we get good grades in school if we work independently and if we can repeat and memorize what textbooks and teachers tell us. And we categorize things into binaries. So either or, not both, not continuums, like what actually exists in nature. And our scientific method that we must follow to generate verifiable, legitimate knowledge claims to have no room for subjectivity. It's only objective. But when we do an experiment, we ask questions and we ask questions of what we perceive to be important, and we exclude other questions. And then we try to isolate that one verifiable truth, which is usually the majority result of the experiment. And by doing that, we're ignoring or invalidating those little outliers or curious diversities of life, right? And then the result is that the whole continuum of possibilities is kind of erased. So our Haudenosaunee worldview, our respect and our value for diversity, our cooperation, our different views, and the importance of interactional relationships, that those teachings are actually captured in our first treaties. So Tommy mentioned the treaties in the land acknowledgement. We have treaties with each other. So how many of you, I wonder, know when Treaty Recognition Week is on Turtle Island? Oh, the question didn't come up. Sorry, guys. I had an activity because I was gonna pull you and see, but it didn't save. So Treaty Recognition Week, is it this week? Is it the week of September 30th? Is it the first Sunday in November? Is it the third week of July? Or I'm not sure. So the answer is, oh, I've got people in the chat. September, I think. Thank you for answering that. September 30th is the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, so that orange shirt day. So that's why people think it's in September, but it's not actually in September. Actually, every day is Treaty Recognition Day, but Yes, so I've got a lot of people saying November. Yes, it is the after the first Sunday in November, which is usually the first or second week of November, is Treaties Recognition Week. The one about July, so the third week of July has July 21st in it, and that's National Indigenous Peoples Day. So September, November, July, we do have special recognition days in those time periods. So treaties are important to us, and that's why I'm mentioning them here. Oh, here's the thing here. Oh, darn. It does exist. This is what I had. Okay, it's too late. You guys all have the answer now. Actually, I'll let you all answer it, and then when I review it, I'll be like, oh, they all need treaties. So I'll give you a second to answer it. Everybody should get the right answer. We just talked about it. I don't want to see one wrong answer. Okay, I'm going to share because some people said I'm not sure. So it's the November one. Okay, so treaties, why I talk about treaties, because treaties really are important. They're not just for Indigenous peoples, because we are all treaty people. And if you live here, you should know your agreements. It's like the house rules of living well on the land together. Here's two important treaties, like basic treaties that you would need to know in my area particularly. We have the Haudenosaunee Confederacy about which talks about our unity of peace with other nations. So from east to west, the squares represent the Mohawk people, the Oneida people, the Onondaga, which is my nation, in the middle. And it's represented by the Tree of Peace. And then to the west is the Cayuga and the Seneca Nations. The Tuscarora Nation, they joined us later to become the sixth nation. So they agreed to live together with us in that peaceful way of life under one longhouse together as a supportive family. Now on April 8th, we have something incredible happening. Somebody put it in the chat. Do you know what's happening on April 8th? Anybody? Yay, a total solar eclipse. Yes, that is the answer. So it follows the pathway over all of the original territories of the Six Nations. This actually happened before, and astronomers traced it back, and they predict that it actually happened on August the 22nd, 1142. So this solar eclipse is talked about in our traditions because it's when we united in this relationship of peace. Hiawatha and the peacemaker, they buried all the weapons of war and they symbolically planted a white pine that has 5 needles that sprout from each bloom. And he said that like the white pine stays green all year round, so too will our relationships of peace. And the white roots of this tree will grow in all directions. And he said, anyone who wishes to join us in this confederacy of peace from all 4 directions will be welcome to sit with us. So this April 8th is very significant for Six Nations, Haudenosaunee peoples, because it is something that was a phenomenal event that convinced the peacemaker to bring peace to the territory. So yeah, let's hope that it has that same energy to bring to the world, because we definitely need it. So we also have the one below, which is the Gaswenta, or the 2-row wampum. So some of you guys should know this one already. When what happened is when we welcomed newcomers to Turtle Island under those white roots of peace, we noticed that, we had these great peaceful relationships, but we still lived very differently. And we saw, the people coming here, clearing the forests and tilling the land and dumping waste into the rivers. And we thought we needed to do something to help our relationship with these diverse people who lived very different than us and had different ways of doing things. So we created a treaty together. And this treaty joined all who comes here to this territory in an agreement of peace, friendship, and respect. And that's what those white rows stand for. So committing to non-interference and committing to that cohabitation as we travel down this river of life together as equals, as brothers, so as family. And we just committed to really respect each other's differences while still seeing each other as equals and still recognizing that we were on this journey together. So diversifying and accepting people is so important to us, and it's so important that we still organize based on the clan system. And this is what reconciliation is. So this is what it is. This is what we're doing. We're doing it by being present. Hold on, I missed this slide. So this is a clan system here, and it is a Haudenosaunee thing that the clan system shows our values of relationships as well. So your clan's given to you by, it's kind of like your last name. So you inherit your clan from your parents. And the difference is that for Haudenosaunee people, your clan is given to you through the mother's side. So it's passed down through the matrilineal system. So I'm Beaver Clan and all of my kids are Beaver Clan. And if ever we were traveling or we needed support, we would seek out other Beaver Clan relatives, no matter how distant they were. Like, so even second and third and fourth cousins are our cousins. And we would seek out Beaver Clan relatives, and we know that they would support us because they were family. So the clan system helps us also to organize, and it helps us today to organize in times of crisis. So when we have other clan families, will step in and they'll care for us if we experience a loss or a trauma within our clan. So, so I just want to pause for a second, and I just want you guys to think now, okay, how many of you guys just learned something new that you didn't know? And I want you to remember your assignment that at the end of this, I'll want you to share the new things that you've learned. Okay. So, and as you're learning, as you're thinking about this, think about all the opportunities that I've had on my learning journey. I've had a lot of opportunities to learn about Western, European, and non-Indigenous culture, and compare that to the number of opportunities that you've had to learn about Indigenous, Haudenosaunee, Onondaga, Beaver Clan culture. And just bring that to your mind, because I really do feel bad. And that's why we're here at this organization, Six Nations Polytechnic, is to give people the opportunity to learn and belong and revitalize our culture and our language. So embedded within every program, whether it be nursing or PSW or social service work or community justice services or trades or all of the things that we do here, whatever it is, it's also the how as well as the what that we're teaching here, as well as the why we're here. And we are teaching how to act and belong authentically within the web of life. We say we're breathing the life back into our cultural DNA. So this is what reconciliation is, and you guys are actually doing it by being present in this experience and by participating. Reconciliation is a banking term. It's a settling up for wrongdoings in an agreement. So it's a balancing the exchange and caring to make things right again. It's identifying and resolving discrepancies, differences, or errors between compared sets of information. It's the reestablishment of peaceful relationships. Some Indigenous peoples believe that there never was a true peaceful relationship despite the shared treaties, because they weren't really understood and honored. So they call for another term called conciliation, which is an act of ending struggle or strife. So regardless of whether you call it reconciliation or conciliation, the first step is the same. It involves seeing that there is a problem. So you might think that that first step is easy, but for Indigenous peoples, it has not been an easy road to get people to really see and to care about our truth. So when society began to listen, laws were actually enforced, making it illegal for us to hire a lawyer or become a lawyer or even engage in any formalized process to seek justice or settling up of our wrongdoings. So even if an ally tried to help us, that was criminalized. Now, these laws, they were in place until 1951. After 1951, we were finally able to launch legal recourse because that's when the act finally labeled us as human beings. So our collective advocacy for truth and reconciliation has been long and obstructed, and it's still ongoing. There's been constant pressure and pushing, and that finally resulted on December 15th, 2006, in an agreement known as the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement. This agreement recognizes the damages inflicted by the residential schools, which was one of the many aspects stemming from and implemented and enforced by the foreign government's Indian Act. So the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement is the largest class action settlement in Canadian history. As part of this agreement, the settlement allocated funding for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to document and preserve and support survivors and their communities in their healing. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it formed in June of 2008, and it released 94 calls to action to redress the legacy of the residential school system 7 years later in 2015. So the whole point of the residential schools, as Julia mentioned, were to continue the agenda of colonization, of land theft for economic exploitation. So look at this picture here. All of these children, they were kidnapped to be assimilated into European ways of being for the purpose of basically breaking down what they termed the Indian problem and breaking down our sovereignty over our own territories. So these places, they were evil. They were not schools. They were about punishing who we are, about wiping out our identity and abusing us and experimenting us and killing us. And then not even like literally, but like really burying the evidence, trying to hide the evidence. So we were not seen as human. We were numbers, and we were disposable, and we were experimented on, and we were disposed of here. So school has not been a safe place for most of us who still challenge the stereotypical narratives and the misrepresentations of who we are. So, I'm just going to say a little bit more on this. Residential schools, they show how damaging the unchecked and assumed superiority of colonialism and Euro-Western ways. Sorry, I always get emotional. They showed how damaging this thinking or this unchecked thinking can be. They were an abuse against self-identity and self-worth, and their published and promoted intent was to kill the Indian in the child for the very, very flawed and narrow perspective that Native people would be better off if we were civilized and our land was better used if it was developed. So the legacy of residential schools, it's been devastating. In these schools, over 150,000 children were forcibly removed from their families, and there are reports of death rates as high as 69%. There is a national residential school death register that exists, and to date, there are 4,200 children who have been named and identified on those death records. And there are so many more who are not named and who are now actively being recovered. So survivors, we're still waiting for some sort of justice. And the residential school that is closest to Nations Polytechnic, which is in Brantford, Ontario, it closed in 1969. And the last residential school in Canada was in Saskatchewan, and it closed in 1998, only 26 years ago. So anybody here on this talk who is 29 years of age or older, they took children as young as 3 years old. So you could have been taken from your families and from your cultures and from your values and your customs. And you could have been taken by strangers. So I just want you to think about that. At Six Nations Polytechnic, we have a lot of language learners, a lot of language programming. We teach Gayokono, a language, which is Cayuga language, and we teach the Mohawk language as well. So we have a lot of people who had their language aggressively abused out of them at these residential schools. So our programming here is really, it really pays attention to historical trauma and to trauma-informed teaching, because language learning is very, very emotional. And my very first opportunity to learn the language was when I came to this place. I mean, I worked at Mohawk College for almost 20 years. And Mohawk College was named Mohawk College, but there was no Mohawk language class at that organization. So they, appropriated our name, the Mohawk Nation name, but they didn't have Mohawk language being taught there. And that is one of the reasons why I knew that I had to come home, is because part of my own healing, I had to be immersed in my community and start learning some of these things that were aggressively taken away from us. So the context of relationships is that despite attempts for us to live together in harmony and respectfully, we were aggressively colonized. And colonization is about the formation of a colony that claims territory, sovereignty, and resources beyond their own borders. So the objective of colonization is to acquire economy. This is very different from immigration, where people join a new territory and come into that house and follow the established customs and laws of the land that they come to, with the objective usually to live a better or safer life. So I was recently, actually last week, at an MP breakfast in Brantford. And I heard one of the politicians say that Canada is a nation built on immigrants. But there is a difference, and we can't keep ignoring the truth of colonization and the cultural and the physical genocide of Indigenous peoples, and then expect reconciliation. Canada was built on genocide, and the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, the largest class action lawsuit in Canadian history, recognizes this. We've already proved it, and has calls to action to reconcile for wrongdoings. So just like the first step to reconciliation is recognizing this and recognizing there's something that needs settling up, the first step of decolonization is recognizing that we are colonized people. Decolonization is defined as the process of deconstructing deeply imprinted colonial ideologies of superiority and privilege of Western thinking and approaches. So it involves dismantling any structure that perpetuates the status quo. So, and that's hard to break through. So it requires effort and change, and it's intended to foster an awareness and action towards addressing unbalanced power dynamics. So if we want to look at this table as a metaphor, We can understand that accessibility is being able to get to the table, and diversity is getting invited to the table. Inclusion is having a voice at the table. Belonging is having your voice actually heard, because you can have inclusion without belonging. And then if we can understand that, then we can understand that decolonization is convincing everyone at the table to chop that table down and use it as firewood, while welcoming everybody to feel and appreciate the warmth of the fire and the warmth of each other. So how do we change the status quo? How do we do decolonization? This is a very tricky question and a tricky process, and it's now becoming even more complicated as the virtual environment limits our accessibility, our inclusivity, and our ability to connect and feel the warmth of each other and feel like we belong. But we can do this and we can begin by unlearning some assumptions that colonized education has taught us. So we need to unlearn that Indigenous peoples were not civilized or cultured until we came across Euro-American contact. We need to unlearn that Indigenous peoples were not educated until we came across English, French, Spanish, or Dutch formalized education. And we need to unlearn that Indigenous peoples were not spiritual or human until we learned Christianity, or until they passed that law in 1951. And we need to unlearn all of these things. And we also need to understand that when we do an apology, or we do a land acknowledgement, or that first awareness step of reconciliation and decolonization, that doing that first step is not enough, because without action, without some sort of resolution, without justice, or without any attempts to settle up, to us, what this feels like is performative, or worse yet, it feels manipulative. So both reconciliation and decolonization, they require action. And some of you may be thinking, well, I want to be a part of the reconciliation and decolonization efforts, but I just don't know how, and I don't want to do it wrong. So I'm going to show you the tool that's called the 3P's framework that can help guide, first, recognition of gaps, and then second, systematic organizational change. So this is the 3P's framework for indigenizing the academy. And I wrote it out of frustration as a guide, initially to help me so that I had a consistent way to explain the various colleges and universities to explain to them, the ones that I was working with, what was required for reconciliation or decolonized education. So for Indigenous peoples, like for us, indigenization is about shifting patterns of thinking and changing behaviors that govern our connections and our relationships with each other. We want to do this so that we all embrace a new understanding and we can foster more equitable ways of being together. So for us, this is, this is a very active process, one that's about including and caring for groups of people, bringing in other worldviews and ways of knowing and transmitting knowledge. And so to do this, we need to consider what this means in the context of institutions of education that have historically and aggressively devalued, marginalized, and tried basically to wipe out our ways of knowing and doing. So institutions, in order to reconcile, need to invest and make effort to go above and beyond to repair that trust that has been broken, and to reverse some of those messages that Indigenous peoples and our ways of knowing are not good enough on our own home continent, right? So we need to recognize that systems of education, they were colonized. The thinking was transmitted to reinforce our exclusion. And the only way to reverse that is to be holistically inclusive of all of the 3P's: people, place, and pedagogy. So including people means that we include the value for our belonging, our physical presence, our contributions to society, This involves establishing meaningful and respectful relationships. So it looks like care to acknowledge our existence. So like with those land acknowledgements, to really consciously see us, not with that archaic lens of being people from the past, but, and Tommy was really great at mentioning this, but recognizing that we are living, thriving contemporary citizens. And it looks like engaging in consultations and consent's important. And it's really important to recognize that you can't just consult and then do whatever you wanted to do in the first place without regard for what you heard from the Indigenous voice or perspective. And you really should recognize that if you're doing something about us, it should never be done without us. So curriculum creation, because of those biases that we've learned from, years and years and years of Eurocentric teaching and perspective and culture, we could sometimes get things wrong if we're not actually including Indigenous people in building these things. So including place, it encompasses the need to establish safe locations. So it's important to recognize that we are healing, we are recovering thousands of murdered children, and that's very difficult for us. Because when you've gone through trauma, you push it back and you compartmentalize it. And so it's like the Band-Aid's been ripped off. And the murders and the negligence that happened at these places that were supposed to be schools, it's really being felt even by, the children and the children's children of survivors. We really need to be conscious that the Band-Aid's been ripped off, so that wound is really raw right now, and school really does not feel like a safe place for us. And so that's what it means to include place is recognizing that. And I think, I think we really need to recognize that Indigenous people are survivors of genocide on their own territory, and publicly reaffirm a commitment to reconciliation and ties to local Indigenous communities to establish those relationships of healing. And then together with people in place, we show respect and inclusion for Indigenous knowledge systems and ways of transmitting information to next generation. So including pedagogy, which requires a shift in patterns of thinking. And this is really hard to do because you don't know what you don't know, right? And it requires bravery to be open to experiencing a new way of doing things, because when your original thinking is challenged, it's uncomfortable, and it can you can have some cognitive dissonance, and you have to have bravery to lean through that. So supporting Indigenous pedagogy, it requires supporting things like experiential learning and personalized, non-standardized, community-based and community responsive priorities. And embracing Indigenous pedagogy requires self-reflection as well, and unlearning some of those assumptions that Western culture has reinforced. And it's the recognition of the diversity of worldviews and perspectives that needs to happen. And it requires reflection on the impacts of unequal power relationships and how those unequal power relationships have influenced societal systems of learning. So to properly include Indigenous peoples into systems of education, we need to include all three things. And this is not just to support Indigenous inclusion, but this is to achieve social justice and a value for all. So what happens now if we don't invite in all three aspects? So what happens is we can fall into something that I like to call the colonial traps. So these traps are assimilation, appropriation, and exploitation, which are the trademark ways that colonization functions to assume power over rather than power with Indigenous peoples. So it's important to note that I come up against these traps a lot, and people really don't fall into them intentionally in most cases. It's that unconscious thing that they're biased towards. And they're just unaware because they're so used to doing things the settler or the colonial way. And it's hard for them to recognize that they are contributing to oppressive process. So when we see that we include people into post-secondary, but not place or pedagogy, the trap that we are engaging in is assimilation. So now this was what intentionally happened at residential schools. They tried to aggressively assimilate children into Canadian society, but sometimes it's actually a lot more subtle. So we can unintentionally assimilate if we are only concerned about those student numbers. So like we're recruiting as many Indigenous students as possible into this program, but we're not including Indigenous languages, or we're not including cultural teachings, and we're not creating those safe spaces for those students to belong. And then when we see the next one, when we see the inclusion of place, but not people or pedagogy, then the trap that we're at risk of falling into is appropriating culture. So for example, if we have a non-Indigenous artist do a sculpture or paint a big medicine wheel in the auditorium, but we are not connected or supporting the Indigenous artists, and we don't have anybody there that knows what that symbol stands for or how to explain it when someone asks questions. But it looks good and it makes us feel good to include. We have nice Indigenous art, but actually what's happening is that's appropriating culture. So cultural appropriation happens when a custom or a practice, so like smudging, or artifacts or ideas, when they're used inappropriately or without acknowledgement or support from like members of the society that those items were borrowed from, that's cultural appropriation. So usually the cultural practice or the item is adopted by a more dominant group of people within society. And so then there's this power differential component to cultural appropriation. A lot of the time it's unconscious. And then the last trap is exploitation. So, and this happens with that appropriation of culture. And this has been happening a lot as institutions rush to meet those calls to action and indigenize before they establish relationships of reciprocity. This is what's happening when institutions are mining Indigenous knowledge and exploiting aspects of our oppressed culture to suit their own needs, while maintaining their power imbalance and while continuing to exclude Indigenous peoples from leadership roles and from faculty positions. So we see Indigenous students support people burdened with the responsibility of educating the entire system, or we can sometimes only see part-time or guest speakers hired to deliver upon all of those requirements of the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action. Or sometimes we even see, like in an organization, we see a curriculum developer who's getting very low wages being hired to create Indigenous content for the entire college or university, and only for a short contract, right? So this is what I would say is exploitation, is when we're just looking at including pedagogy and we're not really creating those meaningful relationships with people, and then making sure that people belong in a place that they feel like they belong in. So post-secondary education institution cannot help to bring about reconciliation without addressing the absence of Indigenous people, Indigenous place, and pedagogy, and the absence of a holistic strategy to reconcile for the legacy of, our recent past exclusion. So how do we fix this? the first step, once again, is recognizing that we have a problem. And remember, we don't know what we don't know, but we can learn more by including diverse people with wonderful, diverse backgrounds, perspectives, and ways of doing things. The first step to inclusion is recognizing that we are being excluded. And then the 3P's model can help you notice what's missing. Okay, so I just see my time has dwindled. So we can maybe meet another time or I can keep going. How does that sound? Because I have quite a bit left to show you how to actually use the tool. The tool actually is expanded to incorporate Brown-Brenner's ecological theory of behavioral change and development. So in this ecological theory, this is something that's commonly taught in early childhood education studies about how childhood behaviors develop and can be supported to change. And it's all about relationships, and it's all about expanding and making sure the 3Ps are in every level of relationship that is in society or is in the organization. And then when we go further with the with looking at the complexity of it, you can see that you can do, it's like a chart of assessment where you're going through a checklist and you're looking at the micro level of relationships and whether people, place, and pedagogy are all there or not. So it's the combination of the two that creates this tool that will facilitate how you organize the culture. So just 2 more seconds.
Yeah,
Because
and I was going to say, Dr. Joe, I love the idea of bringing you back. So do not feel you have to rush through this at all. I would
Okay.
love to make sure we can, silly me, only booked 90 minutes of your time. Did
Okay,
not
yeah.
book more for this. So please don't feel you have to rush through this. I love the idea of reconnecting and re-engaging and staying in relationship together on this.
Amazing. Awesome. Okay, thank you for that.
And yes,
Yeah.
folks in the chat are also thanking you and love to hear the rest of this, but have to go. So just so folks aren't thinking or having that fear of missing out, then let's pause, I think, here. I'll let you have the final word, absolutely. But yes, I commit to making sure we bring you back for more time to take us through this, Joe.
Yeah, and I really apologize for that. I'm usually really mindful with time, but there was sometimes you know that you have to stay on a subject a little bit longer, and I was really inspired by Julia's opening and her realizations that I just wanted to spend a little bit longer talking about that aspect of recognizing how colonized education really is and how that impacts the learner on their journey and how that impacts the way we structure society. So thank you for having me here. I really hope that I at least gave a thorough explanation of what reconciliation is and what decolonization is, and that we really need to think about balancing people, place, and pedagogy, and dismantling some of these things that we're really unaware of. And while we're doing that, create those relationships with each other so that we can understand that we have differences, and that's great. And differences are amazing. They're going to make society more beautiful. So just like there's you have gardens that are going to be hopefully starting to bloom soon. I always think that a garden that has, a lot of different plants and different blooms, and I think those gardens are more beautiful, and they're also more healthy. They have healthier a biodiverse garden is a healthier garden. And I feel that way about society, about humans too. And so that's, really why I'm here, is to promote that and to create relationships, because being at Six Nations Polytech, we don't really have a lot of relationships with external organizations. with like mainstream organizations. And I just, I can really tell that this organization is really prioritizing decolonization and reconciliation. So I'm grateful for that. So thank you for having me.